China's infamous Tofu Buildings are back in the spotlight as typhoons hit China. In Hong Kong, police issued an arrest warrant for a U.S. citizen as the Chinese regime cracks down on pro-democracy activists. And the Chinese regime is creating a wartime environment within China as it faces mounting pressure from abroad. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. The typhoons now hitting China have brought attention to another disaster, the infamous Tofu Buildings. Now, the phrase is meant to suggest buildings that have the structural integrity of tofu. It is often used when shoddy construction is exposed in China, which is often a product of CCP officials embezzling construction funds, also low-quality construction materials and other issues. Now, during these typhoons, an alleged high-end 18-story apartment building in Wuhan City in Taizhou is come into focus, where a 62-year-old woman fell 11 stories to her death while trying to close an apartment window. The powerful winds had pulled the entire window wall off the building. The CCP's local public relations department issued a statement on the case, according to Taiwan News, and declared, quote, "The fatal fall was the result of the resident not being careful when closing a window." Meanwhile, a new virus has begun emerging in China, this one from ticks, and is also capable of human-to-human transmission. The novel Bunya virus was first discovered in China back in 2010, but has recently re-emerged. Reports say that 60 people have so far been infected as of now, and 7 have died. And with the CCP virus, this novel coronavirus, more cases were recently reported in Wuhan, which was the virus epicenter. The Hubei Health Commission issued a press release confirming 3 new cases, although official CCP numbers haven't been trustworthy in the past. Now, it states the cases were confirmed since midnight on August 1st, and alleges they were imported into Wuhan from outside. Now, Hubei province, where Wuhan is located, alleges there are still 205 people under medical observation for the virus. It also confirmed an additional asymptomatic case in Yichang City. Locals in Wuhan said that in many communities, residents were already taking precautions before the recent alert from authorities. And in other news, the United States is preparing to send a delegation to Taiwan led by Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. This will mark the highest level visit by a U.S. official to Taiwan since 1979, bringing new attention to the U.S. break from mainland China and to the growing alliance with Taiwan. And as expected, the Chinese Communist Party is already very unhappy about this. Its foreign ministry spokesman, Wang Wenbin, condemned the meeting and sent a veiled threat that the visit could increase tensions with the CCP over its claims to the Taiwan Strait. Wang said this,
停止一切形式的美台官方往来，慎重妥善处理涉台问题。
And as this delegation moves forward, some in Australia are now calling for the country to back the United States in its engagements with Taiwan. Paul Dibb, a former Australian Defense Intelligence official, is calling on the country to back the United States on Taiwan or risk losing the Australia-New Zealand-United States Security Treaty. Now, in addition to this, a new Quad alliance between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan is also showing signs of moving closer to Taiwan, if not in, say, direct engagement, then in defending Taiwan from the CCP. And in Hong Kong, police issued an arrest warrant for a U.S. citizen. This happens as the Chinese regime cracks down on pro-democracy activists. And this is after the Chinese Communist Party implemented sweeping new national security laws that extend mainland law into the formerly autonomous Hong Kong region and through that to the rest of the world. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo responded to this by issuing a statement which says, quote, "The Chinese Communist Party cannot tolerate the free thinking of its own people and increasingly is trying to extend its reach outside China's borders." In the latest example, Chinese authorities have reportedly issued arrest warrants for 6 pro-democracy advocates resident outside of China, including a U.S. citizen. The United States and other free nations will continue to protect our peoples from the long arm of Beijing's authoritarianism. Now, the arrest warrant confirms existing concerns that the Chinese regime could target citizens of other countries for violating its new laws that forbid criticisms of the CCP or that support issues such as democracy and human rights in China. And now for the broader stories for today. First off, the Chinese regime may have finally admitted something that defense analysts have believed for years, that its prized J-20 fighter jet may not have the capabilities that it claims, and that the so-called fifth-generation fighter jet may actually be classified as a lower generation, a fact that would be a serious blow to the CCP's claims on its military capabilities. Now, an article in the CCP's Global Times news outlet casually did an analysis comparing the Chinese J-20 fighter jet to the jets of other countries, and appears to have inadvertently downgraded the CCP's jet. Now, while the Chinese regime claims the J-20 is a stealth-capable fifth-generation fighter jet on par at least with America's F-35, many defense analysts have pointed out that even the basic design of the jet looks like a 4.5 generation jet at best. And while it's unclear whether it was an error or not, the Global Times stated this in a recent article declaring that the J-20 is a fourth generation fighter jet, again, which would put it roughly at the equivalent of the F-16. Now, this takes place as India and China are engaged in a border dispute, and as India recently received a delivery of 5 French-made Rafale 4.5 generation fighter jets, the first part of a delivery of 36 jets. And the timing of the statements from the Global Times has sparked a debate between the defense communities of India and China over whose military would prevail if a battle were to take place. Now, the Global Times piece states, quote, Chinese experts say the Rafale is only a third-plus generation fighter jet and does not stand much of a chance against a stealth fourth-generation one like the J-20. Now, the article reiterates twice that the J-20 is a fourth-generation jet rather than a fifth, and the statement does align with research that defense analysts have been pointing to for years. The CCP's programs to develop the J-20 and even its previous generation jet, the J-10, have faced repeated setbacks. Now, as I reported back in 2013, while the CCP is accused of using designs stolen from the US F-22 fighter jet program, again in the J-20, and from research on the US stealth F-117 Nighthawk that was shot down over Serbia back in 1999, the main design the CCP used in its J-20 appeared to have come from the Russian MiG 1.44 and lacked some of the basic components that would classify it as a fifth-generation jet. And I wasn't alone in that analysis. As mentioned again in 2013, David Axe, an American military correspondent, also noted on his War is Boring blog that the J-20 apparently lacks stealth nozzles that would allow it to evade radar detection from behind. He also notes that it uses canards, which are small moving wings often used in bolt-on fixes that add radar deflective edges. Now, these extra parts would suggest that it lacks the basic components needed for stealth, and that also would classify it as being as advanced as the Chinese regime claims it is. Now, this ties into some important points. Would the Chinese Communist Party lie about its military capabilities and the effectiveness of its equipment? Well, the Chinese Communist Party does this in many regards. It lies, for example, about its economic numbers. Many Chinese dissidents, for example, say the Chinese economy is basically a Ponzi scheme. The CCP lies about data on viruses. The CCP lies about information when it comes to diplomacy. To lie about its military capabilities to dissuade other countries from attack or to use it for defense posturing when it comes to threatening other countries like they've been doing for a long time. Well, the CCP would very likely do this and has done it in many other regards like this. Now, when it comes to the significance this would have when it comes to the border disputes with India, again, India is now calling out the Chinese Communist Party for this. Different defense analysts in India are criticizing the Chinese Communist Party and making fun of their jet because, again, the Global Times has degraded it, at least in its reporting, from being a fifth-generation fighter jet to a fourth-generation fighter jet. There have also been some different analysts who we've actually quoted on this show talking about how just the U.S. advanced fighter programs, the F-35, for example, and the F-22, could really wipe out most of China's Air Force if a localized battle were to take place in the South China Sea. What does that mean again? If the Chinese Communist Party is lying about its capabilities with these jets, and India is importing advanced fighter jets from other countries. Now, while this may seem like a minor deal, when it talks about, say, the capabilities of the CCP's fighter jet being fourth instead of fifth generation, this actually means a lot, because it has deep implications on the Chinese Communist Party's ability to project power. If the CCP is lying about the capabilities of this fighter jet, Again, one of the pride and joys of the CCP, the J-20. What does it mean for its other weapons systems? Do they really function as it claims they function? Are they as effective as it claims they are? Or were they poorly made? Or do they have design flaws? And does the Chinese Communist Party need to import parts to even make them function in the first place, as the CCP was doing even with the J-10 when it came to importing engines? Again, this raises questions about the basic capabilities of the Chinese Communist Party's military, which ties directly in its ability to project power, which ties directly again to what we're seeing right now, both with the border disputes with India and in the South China Sea. And this ties into other issues as well. When it comes to the Chinese Communist Party's hawks, its military hawks and the hardliners of the CCP, they like to brag about the capabilities of the Chinese Communist Party and its military. If it turns out that the military of the CCP is not as advanced as it claims, and when even countries like, for example, Taiwan and India could really beat it when it comes to military equipment, this is a major blow to its internal propaganda. And also, the Chinese Communist Party likes to posture when it comes to military. It likes to claim it has advanced military capabilities, and it likes to use this for diplomacy. It likes to use this to make threats against other countries, like it has been doing against India and Taiwan most recently. And so again, this could have deep implications for the Chinese Communist Party. Meanwhile, the Chinese regime is increasing its threats against Taiwan, again on this note. It's expected to hold a large-scale military drill, which actually local reports claim is meant to secretly seize the Pratas Islands in the South China Sea. These are controlled currently by Taiwan. Now, as this takes place, there are calls from the Quad Alliance, this new defense alliance between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan, to back Taiwan in the case of the CCP trying something like this. And India is also specifically being called on to back Taiwan militarily. India and Taiwan are also showing signs of growing closer economically as well. Taiwanese companies, for example, are now breaking from mainland China and pivoting towards India. Now, this could have pretty deep implications. If Taiwan joins the Quad military alliance, or even if it doesn't join and they just agree to back Taiwan, this could have deep implications on the Chinese Communist Party's border disputes. Because the Chinese regime, it can make individual threats to Taiwan. It can make individual threats to Japan. It can make individual threats to Australia, India, any country. But when these countries join together, the Chinese Communist Party could not exert that kind of pressure on them. None of that pressure would work. And that is where it's heading right now. If Taiwan were to join in this, really that would probably be the end of a lot of the CCP's efforts on Taiwan. And in the Chinese Communist Party's logic, if the Quad Alliance were to back Taiwan, it would call this being encircled. It would say that they're circled on all sides by foreign hostile forces, because it would have Japan on one side, you'd have India on another, and you'd have Taiwan to the south with Australia really as well. Not to mention, for example, the Philippines to some extent, and Vietnam even more so. Not technically part of the alliance, but in terms of being surrounded by enemies, as the Chinese Communist Party would say in its own propaganda. They use this phrase often. And also, the Chinese Communist Party has done similar things to India by encircling it, for example, with alliances in Pakistan and in Nepal. The idea that India might do the exact same thing by forming an alliance with Taiwan is not far-fetched in this regard. And speaking of this Quad alliance, while India is taking a stronger stance against the CCP, Australia is also becoming more vocal in directly challenging the Chinese Communist Party and its claims over the South China Sea.
So, look, Australia will continue to adopt a very supportive position of freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. We back that up with our own actions and our own initiatives and our own statements.
Now, Australian High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell recently had a Twitter war with Chinese Ambassador Sun Weidong after O'Farrell tweeted that he told India's Minister of External Affairs that the CCP's actions are destabilizing and could provoke escalation. The Chinese ambassador escalated this, accusing him of disregarding facts. This led to a back and forth where O'Farrell noted the court ruling that declared the Chinese Communist Party's claims over the South China Sea as groundless. And the Twitter war also garnered the attention of Indian netizens who are opposed to the Chinese regime. So what are we seeing here? Australia is becoming more bold, and the Chinese Communist Party's criticisms of it are only strengthening Australia's stance. Now, this all started going back to when Australia was calling for investigations, backing calls for investigations into the origin of the CCP virus, this novel coronavirus. The CCP came back and threatened Australia when it came to trade and diplomacy. Australia did not give ground. In fact, a lot of their local analysis said that the friendly veneer, the friendly facade, this mask the CCP had been wearing all these years, had suddenly fallen off. And Australia realized that China was not their friend. The Chinese Communist Party was hostile. And so now we're seeing this developing. But rather than backing down off this, rather than changing its narratives, the CCP is increasingly becoming hostile, which is again pushing Australia further away and making Australia become more strong in its statements against the CCP. And also, as it currently stands, the Quad alliance is very new, and it's really just something seen in the political and policy realm. This will be until it starts getting ideological backing, until it builds an identity and a force. The impact that this recent Twitter exchange had on Indian netizens strengthens the perception around the new alliance between India and Australia. In other words, people in these two countries that are worried about incursions by the Chinese Communist Party and the hostile statements and actions of the CCP are now more likely to view each other as allies. And so this alliance is becoming not just a political alliance, but a civil alliance. And as all of this takes place, the CCP is again doubling down. Rather than reduce its hostilities and attempt to put on a friendly mask again to cool the situations down, it is increasing its hostile actions. And this isn't limited to its new plan to try to seize these Taiwanese-controlled islands under the smokescreen of a military drill, but includes a new declaration for its claims over the South China Sea as well. The CCP changed the definition of waters between Hainan and the Paracel Islands in the South China Sea from being offshore to being, quote, coastal, meaning it has more authority over them. By doing so, it has created a stronger definition to establish its control over that stretch of water. The South China Morning Post, which is really kind of a pro-CCP outlet at this point, it used to not be, quoted an expert on the CCP's Chinese Academy of Sciences stating, quote, "Even if this is not directly aimed at enhancing control, it has that effect." And in addition to this, the CCP is putting into place both in policy and in civil propaganda the conditions of preparing for war. ChinaScope reports, quote, on July 25, 2020 in Beijing, posters on how to handle air raids, which had not been posted for nearly 50 years, appeared in Beijing's Haidan district. A video circulating on the internet shows that air raid billboards were on display, which reminded residents how to enter an air raid shelter quickly after hearing the alarm. It also noted that along the coast in southeast China, public announcements are being posted that alert retired members of the Chinese Navy and Air Force that they are required now to register with the local community neighborhood committee. ChinaScope notes as well that on July 27th, CCP state media broadcasted a statement from Communist Party leader Xi Jinping, quote, emphasizing that the military must follow the CCP command to prepare for war. And as this happens, the CCP sent H-6 bombers to the South China Sea during recent war games. Now, Indian researchers analyzing satellite data pointed out that at the Chinese Kashgar Air Base where the bombers are held, this is located in the far west of the country just north of India, there appear to be underground military facilities. India today alleged the facility could conceal nuclear warheads. This is based on satellite imagery. And they also tracked recent construction being done there. And Japanese news outlets noted a recent paper from a former Chinese military officer in the regime's nuclear missile unit, which claimed the Chinese Communist Party could launch nuclear counterattacks within minutes. And then on August 4th, the Chinese Communist Party rolled out a military boy band in its People's Liberation Army to perform a piece called I Am a Bullet. Among the lines was, "Anyone who dares to make waves, we will destroy you on the spot." And they actually had this performance in Hong Kong, again where the Chinese military is not really supposed to be, at least publicly, and also which is supposed to have autonomy from the mainland. So what are we seeing here again? The Chinese Communist Party has social interest in creating a wartime environment. They use this in their propaganda. For them, this is again propaganda. They want to make it seem like China is surrounded by enemies, that hostile foreign forces have encircled the CCP and that the Chinese leadership need to lock everything down in order to keep the Chinese people safe from them. And at the same time, they're trying to drum up nationalism. They're trying to drum up these different feelings to get the Chinese people to affiliate their own identities, to associate their identities with the party itself. Now, it's questionable whether the CCP would be able to win a local war with any of these countries. Different analysts even say that China could barely win a war with Taiwan, let alone India and possibly not even Japan, let alone an alliance with all of these nations combined and with the United States to boot. The Chinese Communist Party appears to have other agendas rather than direct warfare, and the importance it places on this agenda, at least what we're seeing now, goes beyond soft power, business, and diplomacy. And so what is the Chinese Communist Party doing? Why is it launching these different hostile actions? Why is it drumming up propaganda? Why is it talking about wartime states in China? Why is it warning people they may be drafted back into the military? Why does it have a boy band performing songs about how it will launch attacks on its enemies? Well, this all ties back into what we talked about before. Different hardliners within the CCP, they view the Chinese Communist Party as being under assault, and they don't believe the CCP can weather the current storm as is. The Chinese Communist Party has external enemies. Different countries, just about the entire world right now, to some extent, is uniting and calling out the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party could resolve this in diplomatic ways. It could, for example, say, okay, come to China, investigate our laboratories, come and look for yourselves and we'll see where this virus came from. Let's figure it out together. If there's wrongdoing, we'll fix it. The CCP is not going to do that. Instead, they're talking about, say, increasing their wolf warrior diplomacy efforts. They're attacking these countries. That has led to increased hostilities towards the CCP. And in addition to this, the CCP is advancing all of its territorial disputes. It's starting conflicts with India. For example, when its military killed these different Indian soldiers on the border, it appeared that that was orchestrated based on information coming out at that time. When it comes to its, say, increased incursions with Japan, when it comes to its increased hostilities on Taiwan, when it comes to new actions it's taking in the South China Sea, which is angering countries like Vietnam and the Philippines, when it comes to many different ways it is doing these things, when it comes to, say, even its hostile words in different, say, diplomatic battles with the United States right now, not to mention the economic front, not to mention internal instability from the disasters and the virus, and not to mention the fact that many Chinese people are unhappy with the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party is in dire straits right now. Different hardliners within the CCP, again, when it comes to what we're seeing right now, what are they talking about? They believe that in order to weather the current crisis, the Chinese Communist Party needs to lock down its borders, say that there's too many enemies abroad, too many enemies outside, and use that situation to basically relaunch new cultural revolution policies, where the Chinese Communist Party could try to reestablish its power. This is what is taking place. And really all of these developments when it comes to the wartime propaganda in China and also its hostile actions point to them moving forward with this. Now, with that said, folks, we're again broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. If you want to support us, please join us on Patreon. We also accept donations. If you haven't already, also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow. And if you want to go the extra mile, please tell a friend or family member about Crossroads. Now, with that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.